So of course, if we are not logged in, we shouldn't be able to visit this profile page. And if we were on that page and we click log out, we should be redirected. And implementing that is rather straightforward with NextAuth. All we have to do in the end is go to the pages which we want to protect or restrict in some way, like that profile page here, and then also use some NextAuth functionality there, either directly on that page or in a component of that page, like here the user profile component. Here I want to redirect away if we're not authenticated. And to implement this, I will again import use session from next-auth/client, and then again get access to my session data here. So here I'll then check session and maybe also loading, extract these two pieces, which we get when we call use session. And now in the end, I want to do a couple of things. First of all, I want to check if we're loading. If we're loading, then I want to return a different content and show loading as a text. By doing that, if we save this, I don't see all that content immediately if I shouldn't see it. Now the styling is a bit off. To fix that, I'll give that a class name of classes profile like this, and now at least it's centered. But at the moment, I only see loading then. It never changes. And indeed, that is how use session behaves, at least at the moment. Use session returns the session and loading, but there is this scenario that if you load a page, loading stays true and it doesn't really update. I'm not sure if it's a bug or a feature, but it is what it is. Thankfully, there is a way around that though. Besides use session, there also is get session. And the difference is that with use session, we immediately get this session and loading thing here. And then both session and loading could change if session data was fetched. If we have no session because we're logged out, session will never change though. And as we see, loading unfortunately also doesn't change. It stays true. Get session works differently. Get session sends a new request and gets the latest session data, and we can then react to the answer, to the response for that request. And that allows us to manage our own loading state whilst we're getting the session and act accordingly. It's a bit more cumbersome, requires more work from our side, but it is the way around this issue which we have here. And it's not too difficult to implement in the end. We just need to manage our own state with use state. So we should import use state from React. And that will be our own loading state. So here I can manage is loading and set is loading. And actually we can set this to true initially to, start in that loading state. Then we can manage another piece of data, and that would be our session, which initially is undefined. So here we have the loaded session and set loaded session. And now we can use useEffect, this useEffect hook, which we also have to import from React, to get the session when this component is rendered. So here in this effect function, I will call getSession. So what I'm importing here from NextAuth client, I'll execute this. And this will then return a promise. So here we can use then or use async await. For that, we would wrap it into an extra function though, since we shouldn't make that effect function async. Hence here, I'll just work with then, and I will get my session here eventually as an argument. And now here, session may be null if we don't have a session. So if NextAuth determines that this user is not logged in, or it will be an object with the session data if the opposite is the case. And since here we only care about whether we have a session or not, the only thing we need to do here is call setLoadedSession and set this to the session once we're done. and set is loading to false here eventually. Like this. Now we don't use useSession anymore here because it didn't work as it should here. And therefore now we have this approach instead. Now what's the benefit of this approach? Well, now we can use our own isLoading state here to show this loading message. And we can now react to isLoading being false, so the loading being done, and us not having a session. We can redirect away then. And actually, if that's our goal, instead of managing that extra session state, if we don't need the session for anything else than navigating away, then the only thing we have to do here is check inside of this then block if session is not truthy, so if we don't have a session, and in that case we navigate away. So I'll set isLoading, but if we don't have a session, I will actually navigate away by using window location ref, which changes the URL in the browser, and changing this to auth, for example. So now if we don't find a session, we navigate away with this code. Otherwise, eventually, loading will be false and we do have a session, then we render this content. With that workaround implemented, if we now go back and I reload, you see this page loads. If I log out, on the other hand, I'm redirected. And if I now manually visit profile, I also am redirected eventually. Now we do see the other page content flash here for a brief moment. And the reason for that is me setting set isLoading to false here, no matter what. Actually, I want to do this in the else case here. If we do have a session, we stay on this page, and only then I want to set isLoading to false. If I do that and go to /profile, we only see loading briefly. And we see loading briefly because we do have that brief moment where we don't know yet whether we are authenticated or not. But with that, we implemented the desired behavior here. And we need this workaround because of how useSession works. It fulfills its purpose in the header, and it updates the UI correctly there. But if we rely on the differences between being in a loading state and not having a session, or not having a session because we're not authenticated directly after loading a page, in that case, useSession didn't help us, and this workaround does. It's not the only way of solving this problem, though.